Melissa and Jacob had been together for 3 years. Their relationship looked perfect from the outside: shared values, big future plans, and what seemed like unshakable love. They had met during a charity run in downtown Boston, quite literally bumping into each other at a water station. Jacob spilled his cup all over his shirt, and Melissa couldn't stop laughing as she handed him napkins. 3 years later, they still joked about how Jacob had to finish the race with a soaked shirt just to get her number. They moved into a cozy apartment in a quiet suburb of Cambridge last year. Jacob worked as a software engineer at a promising startup in the city, while Melissa taught third grade at a local elementary school. Weeknights were filled with cooking together, planning weekend getaways to Maine or Vermont, and talking late into the night about the house they would buy someday, the children they would have, the life they would build. Their friends often commented on how perfectly they fit together, Jacob's calm pragmatism balancing Melissa's spontaneous enthusiasm. That is, until their new neighbor Mark moved in. Mark Calloway arrived on a warm Saturday in June, directing movers with easy confidence as they hauled furniture into the apartment across the hall. Jacob had gone down to introduce himself, offering to help carry boxes. He returned an hour later, already laughing about something Mark had said. "You have to meet this guy," Jacob told Melissa, his eyes bright with excitement. "He just moved here from Chicago. He's hilarious, and get this, he's a Patriots fan in Bears territory. Says he's been taking heat for it his whole life." Mark was tall and athletic, with the kind of effortless charm that made everyone feel like his closest friend within minutes. His apartment was quickly filled with high-end electronics, sports memorabilia, and expensive whiskey, signs of a successful bachelor life. He worked in pharmaceutical sales, a job that seemed to require minimal effort while providing maximum rewards. Commission-based, Mark had explained with a wink when Jacob asked about his flexible schedule. "Work hard, play harder." The friendship between Jacob and Mark blossomed with remarkable speed. They discovered shared interests in fantasy football, craft beer, and classic rock bands. Soon, they were spending several evenings a week together, watching games, playing video games, or just hanging out on Mark's balcony, nursing beers and talking about everything and nothing. Melissa got along with him too, though not with the same immediate connection Jacob had formed. There was something about Mark's charm that occasionally struck her as too practiced, too perfect. But she dismissed these thoughts as unfair. Mark had been nothing but kind to her, always complimenting her cooking when they invited him over for dinner, always remembering to ask about her students, always including her in conversations. "You're lucky, man," she overheard Mark telling Jacob one night as they stood in the kitchen during a small gathering. "Most of my buddies' girlfriends can barely stand me. Melissa's cool as hell." Jacob had nodded, his face flushed with pride and beer. "I know. She's the best thing that ever happened to me." The three of them spent more and more time together, maybe too much. Mark became a fixture in their lives, joining them for dinner several times a week, accompanying them to movies, even tagging along on a weekend trip to Cape Cod. He fit seamlessly into their routine, filling spaces they hadn't realized were empty. Then Jacob had to leave town for a week-long business conference in Seattle. It was the first time he and Melissa would be apart for more than a couple of days since moving in together. "You'll be fine," Jacob assured her the night before his flight, kissing her forehead as they lay in bed. "It'll go by quick. And hey, at least Mark's around if you need anything." "I'm a big girl, I can take care of myself," Melissa teased, but she appreciated the thought. The apartment did feel eerily quiet when she was alone. Jacob texted her when he landed and called every night, exhausted from long days of networking and presentations. He trusted Melissa completely, never once questioning what she was doing or who she was with. That was one of the things she loved most about him, his absolute faith in her. While he was gone, Mark offered to help Melissa with a few things around the house. The kitchen sink had been leaking, and he insisted on fixing it despite her protests that she could call a plumber. "Come on, what are neighbors for?" he said, already rolling up his sleeves. "Jacob would do the same for me." She didn't think much of it. But the friendly visits turned into long conversations on her couch, Mark listening intently as she talked about her day, about her frustrations with the school administration, about her dreams of someday opening her own little bookstore. He was an attentive listener, maintaining eye contact in a way that made her feel truly heard. Then into wine nights. Mark showed up at her door on Wednesday evening with an expensive bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. "Thought you might want some company," he said with that easy smile. "Must be boring without Jacob around." She hesitated only briefly before letting him in. What harm could there be in sharing a bottle of wine with a friend? Jacob would probably be glad she wasn't spending the evening alone. They talked for hours, the conversation flowing as smoothly as the wine. Mark sat a little closer than usual, his eyes lingering on hers when she spoke. And one evening, it turned into a kiss. It happened so quickly that Melissa barely registered the moment until his lips were on hers. Mark had been telling a story, gesturing enthusiastically, when he suddenly leaned in. The kiss lasted only seconds before reality crashed over her like ice water. Melissa immediately felt sick about what happened. She pushed Mark away and stood up, her hands trembling. "What are you doing?" she demanded, voice cracking. "I'm with Jacob." "Your friend." Mark had the audacity to look surprised. "Come on, Mel. You can't tell me you haven't felt this too. The way we connect when we talk." "No," she cut him off firmly. "There is no connection. I love Jacob. This was a mistake, and it can never happen again. I think you should leave." Mark left without much protest, though the look he gave her as he walked out the door sent a chill down her spine, something calculating beneath the apologetic smile. When Jacob returned 2 days later, she tried to act normal, greeting him at the airport with a hug that lasted a few seconds too long, as guilt gnawed at her insides. They drove home, Jacob chattering excitedly about the conference, about potential new contracts, about how much he had missed her. But he noticed something was off. Of course he did. Jacob had always been attuned to her moods, able to detect the slightest shift in her demeanor. "Everything okay?" he asked that night as they unpacked his suitcase together. "You seem quiet." "Just tired," she lied, avoiding his eyes. "Long week at school." For a few days, tension hung in the air between them. Jacob kept asking if something was wrong, and Melissa kept denying it, each denial driving another wedge between them. She hadn't seen or spoken to Mark since that night, making excuses whenever Jacob suggested inviting him over. "Did something happen with Mark?" Jacob finally asked, confusion clouding his features. "You guys have a fight or something?" The direct question broke her resolve. She finally broke down and confessed, tears streaming down her face as she told him everything, the companionship during his absence, the wine, the kiss. How she had immediately stopped it, how sick with guilt she felt, how sorry she was. "It didn't mean anything," she insisted desperately. "It was a stupid mistake. I pushed him away right away. Jacob, you have to believe me." Jacob was stunned. His girlfriend and his best friend? The two people he trusted most in the world. He sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, his face unreadable. "I need to talk to him," he finally said, voice hollow. "I need to hear his side." He confronted Mark the next day, knocking on his door with such force that his knuckles bled. Mark admitted to what happened but insisted it didn't mean anything. "We were drinking, man. Things got weird for a second." She shut it down immediately, Mark said, his expression appropriately contrite. Then, with a shrug that made Jacob's blood boil, "It was just a kiss. Not like we slept together." That only made it worse. The casualness with which Mark dismissed the betrayal, as if Jacob was overreacting to something insignificant, ignited a rage Jacob had never experienced before. "You were supposed to be my friend," Jacob said, his voice dangerously quiet. "And you went after my girlfriend the minute I was gone." For a fleeting moment, something like satisfaction flashed in Mark's eyes before disappearing behind a mask of remorse. It was so quick that Jacob almost thought he'd imagined it. Heartbroken, Jacob ended things with Melissa that night, unable to look at her without seeing her with Mark. He packed a bag and moved in with his brother across town, ignoring her tearful pleas. "I can't do this, Melissa," he said, zipping his duffel bag with finality. "I can't look at you without wondering if there was more you're not telling me. I can't walk past his apartment without wanting to put my fist through the wall. I need space." He cut Mark out of his life too, blocking his number and social media accounts. He refused to take any calls or texts from either of them. Melissa tried everything, writing letters explaining how it had been a momentary lapse in judgment, calling from different numbers just to hear his voice, even showing up at his workplace once, only to be gently escorted out by a sympathetic colleague. Nothing worked. Jacob had built a wall around himself, impenetrable and cold. Eventually, she stopped chasing. She knew she'd shattered not just a relationship, but the trust between two people who meant everything to each other. She moved out of the apartment they'd shared, unable to bear the memories or the emptiness. The last box she packed contained a framed photo of them at that charity run where they'd met, both laughing, water spilled down Jacob's shirt. She left it on the kitchen counter, a final goodbye to what they'd lost. What Melissa didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that it had all been by design. Mark had targeted them from the beginning. He hadn't randomly moved into their building, he'd chosen it specifically after meeting Jacob at a tech conference months earlier and identifying him as the perfect Mark. The chance encounter, the immediate friendship, the careful cultivation of trust, all of it had been calculated. Mark had studied them, learning their routines, their preferences, their weaknesses. His goal hadn't been Melissa. His goal had been Jacob all along, or rather, Jacob's position at the startup. As the lead developer on a revolutionary security software, Jacob had access to proprietary code worth millions. Mark wasn't a pharmaceutical salesman, he was an industrial spy, hired to extract information from unsuspecting targets. The kiss had been a means to an end: create discord, break Jacob's focus, gain access to his laptop in the emotional aftermath. It had worked perfectly. Jacob later started therapy to deal with the betrayal, slowly rebuilding his sense of self-worth and ability to trust. During one session, 6 months after the breakup, his therapist suggested an exercise in closure. Write a letter to both of them, she advised. Not to send, just to express everything you haven't been able to say. So he did. And in the process of drafting these letters, laying out his feelings of betrayal and hurt, something clicked. Small inconsistencies in Mark's behavior that had seemed insignificant at the time suddenly connected like constellations revealing a pattern. The pointed questions about his work. The interest in his laptop. The times he'd found Mark in his home office when getting another beer. With growing horror, Jacob began investigating. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions: Mark Calloway wasn't even his real name. The man had a history of similar cons across the country, infiltrating tech companies through their employees, extracting valuable information, and disappearing. Jacob took his findings to company security and then to the FBI. An investigation was launched, but Mark had already vanished, leaving his apartment empty except for rented furniture. The damage was done, certain portions of code had been compromised, potentially costing the company millions. But Jacob wasn't finished. He knew healing wouldn't be quick, but he wasn't going to let this break him forever. With determination hardening into resolve, he began his own investigation, tracking Mark's previous identities and victims. He created an anonymous online forum for others who had been similarly manipulated, gathering intelligence from dozens of people across the country. Pattern by pattern, clue by clue, Jacob built a case. He learned that the man who called himself Mark worked for a shadowy firm that specialized in corporate espionage, moving operatives from city to city, target to target. He discovered that Mark was likely in Philadelphia now, using a new name, targeting a new victim at a different tech company. As for Melissa, she had moved to a small town in western Massachusetts, where she taught at a rural elementary school. Through mutual friends, Jacob learned she was single, still carrying the weight of what happened. Despite everything, a part of him wondered if she had been as much a victim as he was, manipulated by someone who made deception his profession. 1 year after that fateful kiss, Jacob sat in his car outside an upscale Philadelphia restaurant, watching the man he knew as Mark charm a young woman wearing an employee badge from a cutting-edge biotech firm. The same practiced smile. The same attentive gaze. The same predatory calculation beneath the friendly exterior. Jacob lifted his phone and snapped a photo, adding it to the evidence file he would turn over to the FBI the next morning. His hand didn't shake. His heart didn't race. For the first time in a year, he felt completely in control. As he started the car, his phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "I heard you found him. Be careful, Jacob. He's dangerous when cornered." It was Melissa. He stared at the message for a long moment, then typed a reply, "I know what I'm doing. But thank you for the warning. Perhaps some broken things could be mended after all. But first, there was justice to be served, and Jacob was just getting started.